on this Sunday night, celebrating Canada's Indigenous communities. A day to honor and reflect.
We are not more likely to be criminals. We're just more likely to be over-policed.
As an investigation continues into how healthcare workers treat First Nations in the ER. The chair of a Canadian university resigns over controversial tweets. Plus, Trump boasted he'd be giving a campaign speech to 1 million. But the crowd fell flat. And crossing the stage in different ways to mark the important milestone of graduation.
Global National with Robin Gill.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. Today, Canadians honor this country's Indigenous community. This year, there is a heightened focus on the systemic racism and inequalities faced by First Nations people every day, including recent allegations that have come to surface, accusing healthcare workers in BC of discriminating against Indigenous patients with a game. As Abigail Bimman reports, many in the community hope Canadians are getting the picture and will push for change.
My Sisters, I Dance for You, a powerful 3.5 minutes created by Willow Francis. She's just 16. It was a school project her teacher encouraged her to post publicly.
A lot of my friends are sharing the video and they're messaging me about it.
Even your non-native friends?
Yeah.
Now, Francis hopes it spreads awareness about missing and murdered Indigenous women. On this National Indigenous Peoples Day, systemic racism is in sharper focus. Not far from where the Francises live, Rodney Levi was killed by police earlier this month.
Well, it's scary,
our neighboring community.
Yeah. You're not sure, should I call the cop if I need help, or?
While in British Columbia,
this Price is Right game is so offensive and just so incredibly disgusting.
The Price is Right, allegedly played by BC emergency room staff to guess the blood alcohol level of patients, particularly Indigenous ones.
They're doctors. They're brilliant. They've done so much learning. And if they can't even unpack and understand the implications of their behavior, how are we going to expect everybody to have these understandings?
Looking Indigenous isn't an option for people when they wake up in the morning. So to face that kind of treatment and stigma, just when people look at your face, can you imagine how that feels?
The chair of Indigenous Studies at the University of Winnipeg says her research shows hospitals and police stations are some of the worst places in terms of Indigenous racism. But she is hopeful in this moment the impact of the Black Lives Matter movement means more Canadians are paying attention.
Canadians need to be called out for their racism, whether they're aware of that racism or not. There is systemic discrimination.
It's been more than a year since the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls delivered its final report, but the government has yet to act, blaming COVID-19.
We're not going to let this lay. We're not going to allow it to collect dust.
Oh, my story is history.
The pandemic did force most Indigenous Peoples Day events online, but no matter the form, everyone agrees talking about racism and giving a voice to those impacted is so important today and every day. Abigail Bimman, Global News, Ottawa.
Ontario's police watchdog is investigating an officer-involved shooting in Mississauga that killed a 62-year-old man. His family says he had schizophrenia and wasn't a harm to anyone but himself. The situation is again raising serious questions about whether officers are adequately trained to deal with mental health emergencies. Morgan Campbell reports.
Come here, I say you kill my brother. You kill my brother.
Friends, family, and supporters of Ijaz Chowdhury want to know what happened to him Saturday night. The 62-year-old was shot and killed in his home by Peel Region Police. Family says Chowdhury lived with a mental illness and had called 911 when they became concerned he stopped taking prescribed medication. When police arrived, they say Chowdhury barricaded himself in his apartment. Family members say police wouldn't allow them to help with the situation.
There was no opportunity given. There was no way of trying to save his life.
Video captured at the scene and verified by family members shows officers in tactical gear entering Chowdhury's apartment through the balcony entrance, all while family members stood by, concerned because they say Chowdhury didn't speak English.
He can't even take 4 or 5 steps alone.
Peel police say they were told Chowdhury had access to weapons and he was a danger to himself. According to Ontario's police watchdog, police discharged a taser, fired plastic projectiles, and when those had no effect, an officer shot the man. The SIU says a knife was found at the scene and it has invoked its mandate.
It's clearly insanity, doing the same thing and expecting different results.
On the heels of nationwide protests calling for reform, experts say this is another example as to why social workers need to be deployed in these circumstances, not police.
They'll respond with the tools at hand, which are handcuffs, guns, tasers, and rubber bullets, right? They are not equipped with the social and psychological knowledge to deal with mental illness.
Family members and the Muslim community say an investigation doesn't go far enough, and they want a public inquiry.
It is clear that the police did very little to de-escalate this situation. We have no faith in an investigation that is conducted by the SIU.
As the community rallies behind the Chowdhury family, the 62-year-old is being remembered as a selfless man.
This was the most genuine, beautiful soul that we knew.
There's little doubt friends and family will be pushing for more accountability in the coming days. Chowdhury's autopsy is scheduled for Monday in Toronto. Robin?
Morgan Campbell in Mississauga, Ontario. The chair of the University of British Columbia's Board of Governors has resigned. A student group noticed that Michael Kornberg liked a tweet linking the Black Lives Matter movement to Hitler's paramilitary wing and a series of other racist tweets. Catherine Urquhart reports.
UBC is one of the most respected universities in Canada and around the world. But now it's dealing with a scandal involving its Board of Governors, which manages the school's $2.3 billion operating budget. The chair forced to resign because his social media activity included liking hateful, racist tweets.
I think if he's a position of leadership at the university, it's incumbent upon him to reflect community values.
Michael Kornberg was an adjunct professor at UBC's Allard School of Law for 24 years. In 2016, he was appointed to the university's Board of Governors, then elected chair in 2018. It all ended after the group Students Against Bigotry posted photos from his Twitter account. They showed he had liked tweets praising U.S. President Trump's references to protesters as violent looters, and a conspiracy theory comparing Black Lives Matter protests to Adolf Hitler's paramilitary tactics.
UBC's Board of Governors has issued a statement saying that it has zero tolerance for racism, adding that it is committed to addressing systemic racism.
Kornberg has since tweeted an apology, saying, "I owe all students, faculty, and staff, and all those who stand against all forms of discrimination, an apology. I do so with all my heart."
I think it's good that he's resigned and took the responsibility, because no one like that should be the head of any form of university.
Also condemning the tweets, BC's Advanced Education Minister. As UBC deals with the troubling circumstances surrounding the resignation of Michael Kornberg, his position as chair is being filled temporarily by another board member. Catherine Urquhart, Global News, Vancouver.
U.S. President Donald Trump officially kicked off his re-election campaign with an eyebrow-raising speech, but it was in front of a much smaller crowd than he hoped for. He'll face more controversy in the week ahead, with former National Security Advisor John Bolton's new tell-all book set to be released Tuesday. Jennifer Johnson reports.
U.S. President Donald Trump back on the campaign trail for the first time in over 3 months, trying to rally his base as his poll numbers continue to sink. In his 1-hour, 40-minute speech, the president made several controversial remarks, including this one about the new coronavirus.
It's a disease, without question, has more names than any disease in history. I can name Kung Flu.
White House officials had previously denied using this offensive term back in March in front of a Chinese-American journalist. At the rally, people stood shoulder to shoulder, few wearing masks as the rates of COVID-19 reach record levels in Oklahoma and several other states. The president blaming the increase on more testing.
So I said to my people, slow the testing down, please. They test and they test.
White House officials now say the president said that in jest. There were plenty of empty seats, despite the president's claim of over 1 million RSVPs. Trump opponents apparently took to social media in an effort to keep seats empty.
I recommend that all of those of us that want to see this 19,000-seat auditorium barely filled or completely empty, go reserve tickets now.
But Trump blamed Black Lives Matter protesters for keeping rallygoers away, as he blasted opponent Joe Biden's record on racial injustice. The president now faces another threat to his reelection, bombshell allegations from his former national security advisor John Bolton. In an exclusive interview with ABC News, Bolton says his new book details 17 months working for what he describes as a corrupt and reckless leader.
I don't think he's fit for office. I don't think he has the competence to carry out the job. There really isn't any guiding principle that I was able to discern other than what's good for Donald Trump's reelection.
The Justice Department has been trying to block the book's Tuesday release or prevent any profits from going to Bolton. The tell-all book is likely to draw more intense scrutiny on President Trump as he fights to stay in the White House for 4 more years. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
British police are calling a stabbing rampage that killed 3 people a terrorist attack. It happened last night in the town of Reading, just west of London. Witnesses say a man began attacking people in a park. Police managed to apprehend the suspect. British media are reporting the 25-year-old suspect was known by UK intelligence but never met the criteria for a full investigation.
Well, I'm appalled and sickened that people should lose their lives in this way. If there are changes that need to be made to our legal system to stop such events happening again, we will not hesitate to take that action.
Police believe the suspect was working alone. He has been identified as an asylum seeker from Libya. Still ahead, is the Canada Emergency Response Benefit discouraging Canadians from returning to work? Manitoba is easing into phase 3 of its reopening plan, recording only 2 new cases of COVID-19 yesterday. Restaurants and bars can go back to full capacity, but tables still need to be 2 meters apart. Childcare centers and retail stores can return to normal. People arriving from other Western provinces, Northern Territories and Northwestern Ontario no longer have to self-isolate for 14 days. The easing of restrictions is good news for Canadian businesses, but some are facing a new problem. The Canada Emergency Response Benefit, or CERB, is meant to tide over Canadians who can't work because of the pandemic. But as Nadia Stewart explains, it's become a disincentive for some employees to return to the job.
Hasib Sawari says it took years to build the team at Afghan Kitchen, but COVID-19 forced the layoff of nearly 20 staffers, leaving the owners working around the clock.
We're here every single day. I work 7 days a week, almost like sometimes 15 to 20 hours to make sure that we survive through the pandemic.
Now that the restaurant can reopen, Sarwari says they're facing a new challenge. Like many other small businesses, they're struggling to lure their staff back to work.
There's no easy answer. A lot of people lost their job when the economy shut down. Some people are opting to stay home and they have their own reason. But yes, it has been very challenging to bring some of our staff back.
The Canada Emergency Response Benefit was meant to support workers who'd lost their job because of the pandemic. It's not clear how many people are opting to continue receiving the benefit, though they can return to work.
We certainly have members who are telling us that when they call their workers and ask them to come back, the worker says, you know, I'm good. My bills are being paid. I'm just going to take the rest of the summer off, see how things go, and give me a call in the fall.
The Canadian Federation of Independent Business says Ottawa is looking to introduce new guidelines. Among them, if an employee is called back, their benefits would end, and requiring people receiving the funds to be available and looking for work, as is the case with EI.
Moving forward with our bill would give us further measures to encourage people and to make sure that people were taking work when it came up.
I believe they really need to look at that minimum 1,000 threshold and make some adjustments to help out not only the families but the small businesses as well.
Both Sarwari and Kelly acknowledge some workers are unable to return to work because of health concerns or they cannot find reliable childcare. They hope government will find the right balance between Canada's cash-strapped households and small businesses. Nadia Sturk, Global News.
Tourism is key to Spain's economy, which accounts for 12% of the country's GDP. That's why Spain is now opening its borders to European tourists. The European visitors will be allowed to enter the country without needing to quarantine for 14 days. But social distancing restrictions are still in place and masks are required in shops and on public transportation. Spain reported more than 246,000 cases of COVID-19 and over 28,000 deaths. Still ahead, remembering Canada's role in the Korean War on its 70th anniversary. A ceremony was held in the nation's capital today to mark the 70th anniversary of the Korean War. Outside the South Korean embassy in Ottawa, just a handful of veterans and dignitaries gathered because of the COVID-19 pandemic. The war between Soviet-backed communists in the north and the American-backed democratic government in the south broke out on June 25, 1950. More than 26,000 Canadians volunteered to serve during the three-year conflict. 516 of them never came home, making it the third bloodiest war in Canadian military history. It ended with the signing of an armistice agreement in July 1953, but it wasn't a peace treaty. The two Koreas are technically still at war. In the war against COVID-19, we are all changing our behavior. Social distancing is now part of our vernacular. We're told where we can go, where to stand, and think about those taped arrows on the ground. As our Mike LeCouture is here to tell us, that's helping some industries thrive. Mike?
Well, that's right, Robin. You can hardly go anywhere these days without seeing those floor decals directing you where to go or telling you where to stand. Now, same goes for plexiglass dividers, keeping you and the frontline worker protected from each other. As you can imagine, someone has to make those things. And at the start of this pandemic, there was such a run on plexiglass that some companies couldn't get their hands on enough material. Things have leveled off a bit now, but one glass company I spoke with said they think this pandemic has forced a rethink of how customers will interact with businesses, meaning there will be glass dividers pretty much everywhere. The same goes for those decals. It's likely physical distancing will be important for a long time. Those floor stickers will be needed to keep us 2 meters apart. Now, one Ottawa man is betting big on masks. He thinks those surgical masks will be a mainstay. So he imported a mask-making machine from China so that people in this country will stop buying masks from that country.
Not going to lie, it's probably one of the scariest business ideas I've ever come up with. Our hope is that Canadians and governments and businesses will support local, and if our material and our finished product is a comparable price to what they were paying before, that they'll consider swapping over to a Canadian company to buy that product.
Now, he's going to offer more colors than just the basic blue, and he's hoping to partner with companies because he can print corporate logos on those masks. And he believes we will need them for months or even years to come. Robin?
Mike LeCouture in Ottawa. Thanks, Mike. And the new reality airs tonight at 7 p.m. right here on Global. Up next, graduation improvisation. The class of 2020 gets creative in the pandemic. Prince William is having an especially good day. He's celebrating both Father's Day and his 38th birthday to mark the occasion. The royal family has released new family photos of William having a little fun with his children. The Duke and Duchess of Cambridge haven't forgotten their own dads on Father's Day, of course, tweeting both Prince Charles and Michael Middleton a special greeting. Father's Day isn't the only celebration that looks a little different in 2020. This time of year is usually filled with graduation parties, but those aren't allowed right now because of the pandemic. It's been hard on grads, but as Mike Drolet explains, they've come up with some rad ways to mark the milestone.
What better way to say high school grads are moving on up in their education than a ride on a ski lift?
Jet ski graduation.
Or what about heading off into the open ocean on a jet ski? Life is kind of like that after all, isn't it? Visual metaphors aside, graduation is a pretty big deal. And with 2020 putting the kibosh on parties, students have had to get creative to keep their day special. In Calgary, they acted like they'd won the Stanley Cup.
Congrats! Good luck next year, David.
And up the highway in Edmonton, the ceremony was socially distant and responsible.
I wish we could be a bit more, like, together, but I mean, this is the best we can get.
It was good, but not nearly as much fun as this dancing student clearly wanted it to be. Even at the U.S. West Point Academy, graduates sat physically distant from one another with military precision, threw their hats up in the air, and then threw the rules out the door and hugged each other. Every ceremony has been unique in its own way for students desperate for normalcy.
I'm feeling kind of sad because like we don't have prom and like there's like no like ceremony for like graduation. So like you can't really get to walk across the stage and make like that statement, you know, of like I'm finishing, I'm done.
And that holds extra weight in this Toronto neighborhood that carries a stigma of guns and crime. It's why every year community leaders take to the streets, music and a parade for every age, elementary through high school.
Graduating really is a form of resilience, and it really does demonstrate a huge accomplishment for our young people.
So grads couldn't gather en masse, anywhere. And while ceremonies and proms were missed, what was organized in their stead will likely leave a more lasting impression. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
And that is Global National for this Sunday. I'm Robin Gill. We leave you tonight on this first full day of summer with a rare sight, an annual solar eclipse, also known as a ring of fire. It darkened the skies across parts of Asia and Africa as the Northern Hemisphere's summer solstice took place. The last time these two events coincided was 1982, and it won't happen again until the year 2039. We hope you're enjoying the longest day of the year. Good night.